Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are in this fine continent of North America, Canada, or the United States in particular. My name is Norm Baillie-David. I am the Senior Vice President here at TalentMap, and I'm about to walk you through absenteeism, presenteeism, and employee engagement. Essentially, what I want to do over today is talk about presenteeism, absenteeism, and employee engagement. And where this comes from, essentially, is presenteeism in particular is something we've been talking about in the context of employee engagement, but in a wider context in HR for a pretty long time now. It's been at least 7-8 years since the literature really started to get going around this. So the reason why now is because essentially we're not seeing any improvements. And there's a link between absenteeism, presenteeism, and of course employee engagement, which is our bailiwick and which is where we come in. So you can see on the screen, you can see essentially how I'm going to attack the problem. Most of the time, I'm going to be talking about presenteeism. But then that being said, essentially, we're going to be speaking about absenteeism, and I'll come back towards the end really to talk a little bit more about employee engagement and the link between it. And it might not be what you're thinking in terms of that link. So just a quick rundown of TalentMap, who we are. I noticed in the registration list, many of you don't work with us. And that's actually a good thing from our perspective because you get an exposure in terms of how we work and some of the things that we do. We've been around, TalentMap has, for about 18 years, a little bit more. All we do essentially is employee engagement and workforce measurement. So we're not a wide or a very diverse firm from a service offering point of view. We focus really on workforce measurement and employee engagement in particular. We do also work in the area of 360 feedback, in the area of onboarding surveys, exit surveys, and safety culture. But really 90% of our business is really focused around employee engagement. So over time, and with those numbers, you can see we've developed what we like to think is a pretty good level of expertise in this particular subject area. So here's just a little quick glimpse of some of the clients we work for, both in Canada and in the United States. And of course abroad. We do work also in places like South Africa, Australia, and the UK, but most of our work is here in North America. And so essentially, I started to explain why the topic. And while I'm doing that, you know, I really like Dilbert. I like Dilbert for its honesty around organizational behavior, organizational psychology. And I picked this cartoon out, this particular Dilbert out, because although somewhat exaggerated, it really says a lot of what I'm going to say today in terms of the state of presenteeism, absenteeism, employee engagement, and the underlying attitudes that are allowing this to foster and to continue as a phenomenon in organizations. And we're going to see why that's, you know, taking such a toll in terms of organizations. So really, when we're talking about absenteeism and presenteeism, of course, presenteeism is a relatively new term. And what's really happening is presenteeism, the costs up to now at least, have been a lot more hidden. We've always focused on absenteeism, and even in TalentMap's presentations and in our literature, we relate how higher levels of employee engagement reduce absenteeism. Is that the case for presenteeism as well? Stay tuned. We're going to show you that as part of this webinar. So essentially, you know, where do we begin with all this? Well, let's start essentially looking at some of that underneath. We pretty much know about the tip of the iceberg, the absenteeism proportion. But what about underneath it? And what was startling when we started to do a little bit more digging, a little bit more research in this particular area, what was really startling was the nature, the cost, the absolute cost for each employee in each year over time. 4 days are lost to absenteeism. We used to think that was a big deal. That was a big problem. Almost 60 days. The ratio, depending if we're in Canada or in the United States, ranges from about 6 times the cost of or days lost to absenteeism to 8. So it's around, it works out to around 7 times the cost of absenteeism. 57.5 days. If you think about it for a second, that's 3 months. 57.5 days is 3 working months, less a day and a half or so. So we're losing productivity. Essentially, for most of our employees, for the average employee, we're paying for a year's work and we're getting 9 months. Now, of course, there's a lot underneath that. We're going to dig and explore into some of both the causes, but most importantly, the solutions. Just looking at some Canadian data. I apologize for some of our U.S. folks on here. I'm going to look at some Canadian data. There's a couple of things going on here. First of all, let's look vertically. The lost productivity from presenteeism is essentially what I just said before, 7.5 times greater than the productivity from absenteeism. So it's 7.5 times the problem that absenteeism. And it's costing Canadian organizations between $15 billion and $25 billion per year. This is a Statistics Canada study, so we take it pretty much from a reliable source. So it's indisputable that this is a huge, just has a huge magnitude, a huge impact. And of course, why it still lingers is because the costs are largely hidden. And more importantly, we're going to see the cultural phenomenons that are really acting counter to our, we look at this, we look at the result, the return on investment of doing something about this, and the business case is clear. No matter which way we're looking at it, there's a strong business case for attacking this issue called presenteeism. But there's also very, very strong cultural antecedents not to, and that's really, what we're looking at. So, of course, what are we talking about when we're actually talking about presenteeism? Now, there's a little bit of a misnomer and myths around it, but fundamentally, the definition, the working definition that's used most often is presenteeism occurs when employees who are physically present are, due to a physical or emotional issue, distracted to the point of reduced productivity. We would expand that physical presence not to be actually just a physical presence in the office, but actually working. So if someone's working from home, technically, and they are less productive due to a physical or emotional issue, that too is presenteeism. And that too, because essentially the productivity should remain at least the same, sometimes higher for someone working at home. Yet if they're inhibited because of a physical or emotional issue or distracted and their productivity is reduced, so even if they're not quote unquote present in the office, which is becoming hopefully an antiquated concept, but nonetheless, most of us still work in an office environment, at least when we're working with larger organizations. So that working at home or we can also be exhibiting presenteeism working from home. That's almost counterintuitive, but that's essentially the trend, what's happening. So what is presenteeism? It's employees working when they're actually physically ill, when they're sick, working at home or working in the office. We tend to think about it as in the office. It tends to be more damaging when someone's working in the office, but nonetheless, it's as damaging to the individual no matter where they're working ill. They're distracted by external emotional issues, a death in the family, for example, childcare. What do I do about my parents? My grandmother fell down, my mother fell down the stairs, and I have to go to work. All of these things that will distract from our working minds and essentially result in presenteeism. Mental illness as well, employees working when mentally ill. Conducting personal affairs repeatedly for large amounts of time at the expense of productive work. So it's not only illness, it's not only emotional trauma or emotional issues. Sometimes presenteeism also is that person who's, essentially running their home out of their office. And we've probably all met somebody like that. I've got somebody in my mind personally who I'm thinking about right now. But these are the folks who are spending their, pretty much extended amounts of time on the phone dealing with personal matters, not necessarily ill. And that also counts as presenteeism. What presenteeism is not And we often think, and I'm hearing this more and more in the boardrooms, oh, well, we got to shut down Facebook because, people are spending too much time on Facebook. Yeah, if people spending half a day on social media, that could be counted as presenteeism. But the odd checking or making personal calls is actually conducive to higher productivity because why? Because it counters some of the stress that's created by those emotional or physical issues that we're dealing with. So let's talk a little bit about the causes. What's behind this? Why is presenteeism what it is? And what's behind it? So the first thing I'll do is talk about something that most people think about immediately when we're thinking about presenteeism, and that's, I hear a lot about this. Oh yeah, those folks who are working in temporary positions, they're the ones that are they're going to come to work even if they're sick. They're afraid of losing their status. They want to make an impression and do a good job. They don't get sick leave is another one. And you know what, folks? Research actually shows that it's permanent employees who are more prone to presenteeism. So that's a myth. The temporary employee, the contract employee, the part-time employee, the one without the benefits, is the one that tends to be working on the job when sick, when ill, when distracted. That's a myth. You see the source reference there. It's the permanent full-time employees, often with, but not necessarily with, the sick leave benefits, that are much more prone to presenteeism. So that's one of the myths. So what are the actual costs? So one of the other things is we looked at different occupations. We do engagement surveys where we're measuring a lot of different things in those engagement surveys. And we do see that presenteeism, both in our research and in external research, is found in certain specific categories, work environments. Education, social welfare, healthcare are the most prominent in terms of the highest number of people who are exhibiting presenteeism. It's not just, if you're not in one of those three sectors, don't think you don't have an issue. It's an issue, economy-wide. Public sector, private sector, it doesn't really matter. But education, social welfare, healthcare, we'll see one of the reasons for that in a second. And you know what? The irony of this whole thing is you would think someone working in healthcare would know better than to come to work when they're sick. But yet 80% plus of respondents in our surveys in healthcare essentially have said that they have worked when they're sick. But why? Why are they doing? They know intuitively that that's not a very smart thing to do, yet they still continue to come to work. They show up. Now, especially in a hospital environment, if you're working in a hospital environment, you probably know that there are now policies increasingly that are saying, no, you stay at home if you're ill. Also, we're seeing in public places like airports, airport authorities are starting to influence this policy, but the individual, which is where this comes from, the individual still has a predilection to come to work even if they're sick. And when I say sick, I'm also including mental mental illness in that, and other forms of distraction that result in presenteeism. Why? And the biggest reason is the phenomenon of irreplaceability. The individual feels fundamentally that they can't be replaced. And now part of that is quote-unquote truth. They have a certain skill set, just like a surgeon comes in, a heart surgeon, if they're the ones on duty, they have a specific skill set that not everybody can do. But it's not just if they're actually irreplaceable. It's also if they think they're irreplaceable. They don't want to let down their colleagues, but there's also an external pressure. Let's not just put this on the onus completely on the individual. There's also a great pressure, a social pressure, an organizational pressure, a cultural pressure to come to work. So it's both. There's both an individual motivation, but there's also an external organizational cultural motivation, and we're going to look at those both in a little bit more detail. Let's start with the organizational side. The actual workload and the job demand also has been found to have a big impact on presenteeism. People feel they have to come to work, and that includes working. When I say come to work, I just mean work. It also includes working at home while ill or injured or distracted. If the workloads are high, if there's a lot of, if there's deadlines with important consequences, and of course, what's an important consequence? The definition of an important consequence is however the individual defines that, whether it's a journalist who needs to get their article in for deadline, whether it's a proposal that's due the following day. There's a lot of different reasons why there are important deadlines, but those deadlines essentially contribute to presenteeism and the organizational culture around those deadlines. That combined with very little backup. So if the individual feels as if they don't get the work done, that nobody else will on their behalf, if they don't feel that they have that backup support, they're also essentially going to exhibit presenteeism. And even if they do have backup support, if they feel that their work is piling up, if they're not doing it, that induces more stress. And so that there is another motivation to work even if we're sick, even if we're distracted. So that workload and job demand combined with the feeling of irreplaceability are also our two big contributors to presenteeism. And then you have workaholism. Now this is a nefarious category because first of all, we see, workaholics, it's documented, it's researched. They have higher levels of presenteeism, which basically means they're coming in sick, they're coming in injured, they're coming in distracted, and they're not as productive. The difference, why this is a separate category and we can't necessarily lump it into the others, is because this individual is working excessively, but more importantly, they're working compulsively. This is compulsive behavior. And of course, compulsion also fits into some of the categories of mental illness now, and needs to be treated differently. The misnomer, the myth around workaholism is that the workaholic, whether or not if they're always on, they're always working, is going to be doing more. Well, in actual fact, studies clearly show the workaholic is less productive than those with a better work-life balance. They have higher burnout rates, and they're not as happy. They tend to be more stressed. They're obviously sicker, and so why is this the case? And we're going to see in a second. This is where the cultural influences come into play. And then we've got something called performance-based self-esteem. It's even got its own acronym, PBSE. And PBSE is the idea that your self-worth, your value, not only to your organization but to yourself, depends on your job performance. We feel if we have PBSE, if we're exhibiting PBSE, we feel we have to prove our worth on the job. It's the job that is the nature of how we prove ourselves. And of course, we see this very, very distinctly, especially in young employees. Millennials now, and of course, you see the graphic below. As teachers, and I added parents and managers, we need to break the link between how someone performs and how they perceive their competence and linking that with self-esteem. Where does it come from? It comes from, you win the medal at soccer, that's great, you're a better person for it. And it all begins as parents and teachers. You get the A, you're a better person than the person who gets the D. In the classroom. It all starts in the very early formative years, but it translates into that linkage between our self-worth, our self-understanding, and our worth on the job, and that's going to drive presenteeism. But it's not just PBSE. What's interesting about this particular phenomenon is it strengthens when there's also high physical and psychological work demand. So if you add on the previous category, workload and job demand. So somebody who is in a very, very demanding job, combined with this innate nature, I say innate, but it's actually socially driven, it's environment, that drive to prove one's worth with a very high demanding job, and the result is presenteeism. Working when you're sick, working when you're injured, working at home the same way. It doesn't matter where you're working, but you're working instead of you're trying to get tasks done, and of course all of which is contributing to presenteeism. So I already talked a bit about the cost, and you see the iceberg here again. So what we're looking at primarily, if you're in HR on the benefit side, you know clearly what the personal health care costs are, the medical care, the pharmaceutical care, all of this. This is what you see, the 30%. What we don't see, and why this is such a nefarious phenomenon, is that are the absenteeism and the presenteeism that relate to, eventually are going to translate into some of those medical and health costs. But more importantly, they never will. They will reveal themselves in a very hidden form called low productivity. And of course, low productivity is going to, the long-term cost of low productivity is the need to engage more staff to do the same job, obviously, right? So the consequences of presenteeism, I just said, productivity loss, just stated. You know what, we're talking, I found an interesting factoid when I was researching this. And that interesting factoid is just about to hit now. I found myself coming to work. I'm terribly allergic to pollen, animals, everything you can think of. And I never thought of it this way, but the pollen count is directly related with decrease in performance in many, many organizations. You know, so if you're in benefits, if you're in insurance, if you, think about having a little bit of a dispensary there, and if somebody's not taking their allergy meds, you might want to be sending them to the doctor to get that done, because that pollen count is having a huge impact on performance. And of course, think about it for a second. If any of you suffer from hay fever like I do, you'll know that we brush it off. There's even commercials that pick up on this. You brush it off. Oh, not a big deal, right? But you're just as ill as somebody who's nursing a flu or a cold. Same symptoms. Yet we tend to brush it off. No, we're not sick. We're not sick. It's just allergies, right? That's what you say. But it is detracting from our productivity and performance. And I never thought I was exhibiting presenteeism when I was having my hay fever bouts until I read this research. And now I'm going to take my meds. I don't want to be doing this. So I'm hoping that you're going to see the same thing and look in your own organizations to see and realize that, if somebody is fighting allergies, that it's not just, don't worry about it. It's affecting their health, obviously, and that's something that they have to deal with personally, but it's also affecting their productivity. Poor health and exhaustion. Of course, when you continuously work sick, ill, you're stressed, you're exhausted, you're tired, you're not sleeping, then that's a strong predictor of somebody who's going to eventually end up taking long-term disability or sick leave. Those of you particularly in the public sector where sick leave and long-term disability leave policies are more flexible than many in the private sector, I'm sure will attest to this. But the one we see most often, and this is the only consequence of presenteeism that's beginning to manifest itself more and more in organizations that we're actually seeing, and that's 80% of respondents in this Canada Life study that you see in the third bullet, 80% stated that they had become sick because they caught something in the workplace. Now, of course, they assume that. It's a survey. But you know what? We've all been there. We've all seen somebody who's sick at work, and we've all lived the fact that we've turned up sick as a result. And just this, just the attitudes towards that only beginning to change now. I walked into our own office here at TalentMap yesterday, walked by a colleague's office who stopped me to say hi, and currently, no sooner than he did that, said, really, I'm really feeling not too well here. Well, I said, well, I'm doing a presenteeism webinar tomorrow. You're going to be my case study. I mean, it goes on everywhere. And, of course, the nefarious consequence here, the productivity loss, we don't see it necessarily. the poor health and exhaustion, we may see it, but we don't necessarily, we don't link it to presenteeism. But those catching the cold, catching the flu, getting sick because a work colleague was brought it into the office, that we start to see. That's the thing that's starting to change some behaviors in organizations. Of course, that leads us to, the nature of the issue. Many of you must have been exposed to this in some way, shape, or form. The key question is, what can we do about it? Now, I've been focusing most of my conversation today, my discussion, on illness, but it's not just about illness. It's also about, it's really about distraction. Distraction in a much larger sense of the word. We got to address the root cause. And the root cause, everything boils down to stress. Stress management. All of the factors that we talked about before, whether it's workaholism, whether it's workload, job demand, deadlines, all of those increase stress. And the stress is both the cause and the consequence of presenteeism. Now, as anybody who's familiar with this, I'm not a doctor, I'm certainly not a psychologist. We can't eliminate stress, but we can control and we can manage. We don't even want to eliminate stress. Positive stress is good in an organizational context. It does stimulate performance. This brings me to the external side. So part of this is internal motivation. The PBSE, for example, part of this is internal. Yet most of this phenomenon, most of the stress is actually aided and abetted by the organizational cultures in which we work. And let me talk to you a little bit about some of those cultures that are contributing both to the high stress, but are also contributing to presenteeism. And as you can see, once we understand that much of this phenomenon called presenteeism is culture-induced, we can then take steps to change the culture. Now, you're probably thinking, gasp, oh my God, we got to change culture. That's a hard thing to do. Well, not really. Not really. I've seen it done, and I'll show you exactly what we need to do and how it can be done in a relatively painless way. So first of all, we need to understand, well, what are the cultural phenomena at work here? FaceTime. FaceTime, the pressure to be seen in order to contribute. Now, thankfully, that's beginning to die a slow death. And thank goodness for the millennials, because the millennials are putting an end to this. But if you're an Xer or a boomer like myself, we've lived this. We need to be seen in order to be seen to contribute. We're not working unless we're seen to be working. In a little bit earlier days, you would see office environments which would essentially, nobody would move until the senior person in the office left, usually around 6 o'clock or so, and then you'd see people walking out the door. So that FaceTime, that need to be seen in order to contribute, you can see very, very clearly why somebody who's sick, somebody who's stressed, somebody who's distracted, who by whatever reason it happens to be, feels that they got to go into the office. They need to be seen. Compound that with performance management regimes that are presence or time-based. What do I mean by presence or time-based? Well, part of the evaluation, part of the performance management system, whether it's built into the appraisal process explicitly or is it implicit? When the manager evaluates someone's performance, are they looking at the number of sick days that someone takes? The number of absences? Are they, again, interpreting FaceTime? Are they looking at the number of hours on the productivity that somebody has? So I've seen organizations, and not just a few of them, that are looking at, okay, you took a certain number of hours to do this particular job and a certain number of hours to do that job, and your utilization is X. Basically, so there's time-based performance management regimes that are forcing people, at least making them feel, yeah, I got to be working here. I can't afford to take time off. Whether or not I'm working at home or in the office is immaterial. I can't afford to take time off. The next one is the most nefarious one, is that tacit support for workaholism and compulsive working. Now, we all know workaholism is not a good thing. Rationally speaking, it's not. Yet why then do we encourage it by rewarding it and supporting it like a badge of honor? And you see this from leadership all the time. Let me give you a concrete example. So an organization we were working with had a very, very busy November, December period. Extremely busy, really stretched people to the max. And of course, the time for presenteeism, you know what, it tends to be the highest in November, December. Why? Well, it's the cold season, at least here up in Canada. But it's also, you know, it's also the holiday season. So there's a lot of other things going on. People have to worry about getting gifts, Christmas shopping, making sure that everything's ready. So you got all that distraction. And you add that, the busy time of the year, caused in many cases by a fiscal year end that's ending December 31st. So the organization I'm talking about basically sends out an email message to its staff close to the end of the year and says, you guys have worked so hard, you've worked so long, thank you for that. That was great, we really appreciate it. Well, what message does that send to the employees themselves? Well, first of all, the recognition's good, but the recognition's for the wrong reasons. The recognition is not that we met our targets, thank you very much, it's that you worked long hours, thank you very much. And all of those innate, you know, obsequious messages that are supporting and promoting workaholism, compulsive working, the positive recognition for hardship, working hard, even while you're sick, putting in the extra time, all of those tacit pats on the back are reinforcing the presenteeism behavior. And of course, it also reinforces the feeling of irreplaceability. So if we're going to attack presenteeism, that's what we have to attack first. My screen seems to have, there we go. How do we do that? How do we attack that? Because it's so prevalent in our organizations. Why isn't presenteeism disappearing? It's because all of that is going on, and it's going on constantly, and it's something that we don't even think about. So what we need to do is, if that's the culture of the organization, if that's our culture, then we need to counter it. We need to create a counterculture. And this isn't theory, this is practice. This is worked. We've seen great examples of this. And so the elements of the counterculture are the following. The first thing is we got to start on the policy side. So you need a flexible work policy, whether that's working at home, taking time off. It's only the beginning, though. It's only the foundation. Creating the policy in and of itself, if you have one, you may notice that a lot of people aren't taking advantage of it. They're still showing up sick. They're still working at home while sick. How many times have we done the conference call? Somebody's staying at home. Good for them. At least they're not spreading their germs, but they're still sick, right? How many times is that happening? The flexible work policy is only the start. The culture has to be addressed. And the next piece that's policy or program driven in your organizations is we need to make sure that our appraisal systems are based on results and achievements and not based on time and presence. Sounds logical, but it's much more difficult to do and much less prevalent in many organizations that we work with. But it needs to be in place, because if we feel that our compensation, our appraisal, our self-worth is going to be dictated by how much time we spend working and or the fact that we're seen, well, we can create all the flexible work policies we want, and people are going to continue in the presenteeism behaviors. And then we need to actually address the workload issue. We need to, one of the best ways I've seen this done is a leadership being cognizant that they need to ask a fundamental question. And each of us as leaders, we need to do that at least in our particular areas of responsibility and accountability. And when we have a project, when we have an objective that comes on, we need to ask ourselves, do we have the capacity to take this on now? Fundamental, because obviously everything else, your engaged individuals are going to, they're going to comply. They're going to, you know, we don't have the capacity, they're going to do it anyway. They're going to work sick, they're going to work injured, they're going to work distracted. They're going to work less because the productivity is lower. But we need to, we actually have to sit down and look at you know what, can we handle this? Do we have the capacity to take this on now? And then the quote-unquote shaming. Shaming, not in an overt sense. This is very, very subtle. But what we're trying to do here, I'm trying to get your attention because hopefully you'll take a little bit of a gasp when you say, what, you shame individuals publicly? No. What we want to do is we want to counter that tacit approval for the work long hours, great job, you work till midnight, that's fabulous, thank you very much. We need to discourage that. We need to, and our leaders especially need to, we need to discourage compulsive working. We've all heard the badge of honor. Oh yeah, I worked till midnight last night, or we're sitting in the meeting on Monday morning and we're saying, yeah, I worked on that, I looked at that over the weekend. They may or may not have, but that's the culture that they want to be seen to have done that. And the response shouldn't be, great job, thank you very much for working on the weekend. We really appreciate that. The response should be, oh really? You didn't have to do that. Thank you very much for that, but you could have done that in office hours, and implying that the person is less efficient as opposed to a desirable behavior working longer, right? And you know what? I've done this myself. I can tell you personally, as a personal anecdote, this works, because when they see the leaders not valuing the hours, they're valuing the results and getting there in a balanced and compressed time frame, they're going to shift their behavior. And that's what we're trying to achieve here. We're trying to discourage the compulsive working. We're trying to discourage those and challenge those long work hours as inefficiency. Now, there's always going to be times where, yes, we need surge, we need extra capacity for a temporary basis, and people will rally to the cause. But that's not the same thing as that being embedded in the culture on a constant basis, which results in presenteeism. We also have to make sure that people feel that they have that adequate support. So if I can't work, if I'm waylaid at home sick, if I have to take care of my mother who fell down the stairs, I can feel that I've got support. I can feel I can call somebody and they're going to fill in for me. That's essentially the key, because if you don't feel that, you're going to do it. And so we need to, as organizations, build in some redundancies to allow that to happen, and we do that not by increasing the headcount. That doesn't make any sense, nor will its senior management buy that, but we can do it through cross-training. We can make sure that somebody is in place to fill in on a temporary basis, so we feel we have the support. And then we've got stress management, improvement health, wellness programs, and we talked about wellness in another webinar. Many of you are now being exposed to wellness. There's going to be stress in every organization. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that for the stress, we want to minimize the unnecessary stress by doing all of the things that I talked about. But we also want to help individuals cope with the basic stress of the job. And we do that through physical fitness, appropriate nutrition, and wellness. And when we do all of these things, folks, we're going to start to minimize. We're going to start to have an impact. We're going to start to see the counterculture of, I'm not working today, I'm sick. I'm taking the break I need to recover, so that when I recover in a shorter period of time, I will be more productive. And that's really what it all boils down to. Now, up to now, I've been talking all about presenteeism, and I haven't been saying anything about engagement. And where's the link? Now, the link is an uneasy one, because you can think about, if for those of you who are less familiar with employee engagement is measured fundamentally by the attitudes which drive behavior such as going the extra mile. We call it discretionary effort. Going the extra mile, bending over backwards to help someone else, all of those things. So what we have to watch out for is that, you know what, as we move towards engaging more and more of our individuals, if we're not careful, it's those same highly engaged individuals that might be exhibiting the behaviors that we're trying to prevent on the presenteeism side. Why? Well, because if someone's fundamentally engaged in their job, engaged with the organization, if they're proud and optimistic and inspired, and they would recommend the organization, and they see how they contribute, all of those ingredients to a highly engaged organization, then they're going to be, these are the ones that are going to be going the extra mile. They're the ones that are going to have the extra stress, the extra commitment, and if we're not careful, then we can also see higher presenteeism associated with high levels of engagement. On the screen, what you see is a typical highly engaged organization. And from top to bottom, you see all of the different dimensions of that engagement, from work environment, or the perception of work environment being very, very high, to the perception of total rewards or compensation being very low, and everything else in the middle. And from left to right, we see the relationship between each of those dimensions and the level of engagement. So you can see this, the strong engagement driver. And in a highly engaged organization, what we typically see is that work-life balance, which includes the stress, by the way, those stresses that contribute to presenteeism that I was talking about. We see work-life balance on the left-hand side. It doesn't contribute. There's no pattern between work-life balance and engagement. So there's some people who are very engaged yet have terrible work-life balance. And there's some people who are not engaged and have terrible work-life balance. And there's some people who are, not engaged and have very good work-life balance. There's no pattern there. And because there's no pattern, when we do this, I present this to leaderships, oftentimes they'll say, okay, well, let's focus on what's going to improve engagement. And since work-life balance is not one of those things, we can ignore it. Well, we can't. It's a different dimension. It's a different issue. We need to take work-life balance out of the engagement equation. Of course, when I say work-life balance, I'm also meaning presenteeism, because the work-life balance, as you saw, is contributing to that presenteeism. We need to take it on as a separate issue. Highly engaged people have a danger of, if the culture is not right, have a danger of falling into being presenteeism. Or presentee, if you will. So it's really about ensuring balance. So we want to strive towards higher engagement. We want to create the conditions and the attitudes for more and more people to be engaged in what they're doing. But at the same time, we need to recognize that if the culture is not right, and if we don't have the appropriate safeguards in place in terms of how we treat long work hours, extra stress, a performance regime that favors presence and time base over results. Those things can contribute to presenteeism, and that's actually going to detract from the productivity that we're gaining through a highly engaged organization. So we need to, at the same time, promote high engagement through all of the things that we normally do to engage, at the same time balancing that with a culture that really prides itself on balance, and that's really what it all boils down to. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going to wrap up. I see there's a couple of questions that have popped in, so I'm going to address those. Now, if it would be a really good time, if you do have a question or two, jot it into your questions box, and I'll address them in a second. Before I do, I just want to bring your attention to some of the places you might see myself, TalentMap, or my colleagues in the near future. So the New York Tech Summit, you'll see a couple of my colleagues there if anybody's going. So really we're trying to be on the front edge of using technology to enhance engagement, learning about what that is, and actually speaking about what we know. And that's going to be a couple of weeks. The HRPA Leadership Summit conference, helping employees own engagement. That's our CEO, Sean Fitzpatrick, who will be speaking there on June 14th. I'll be doing a webinar on the 22nd called Managing Your Own Employee Engagement Survey, so helping organizations that don't have the funds, would really rather do it themselves, and giving some tips and tricks and avoiding pitfalls in terms of how to do it yourself. And I'll also be in Austin, Texas, early in the fall, in September, actually not quite the fall, late summer on the 11th of September. To talk at a safety culture conference in Austin. So hopefully we can catch up with some of you there, and I'm going to now look at a question or two to see here. It says here, can you please highlight on the cost burden of presenteeism in a typical healthcare organization with 100 staff? Well, I apologize, but the numbers that I have are generic and from generic research. We don't have the numbers into that great a detail to be able to tell you for that specific an organization what the costs of presenteeism would be. However, what I can tell you is in a typical organization, U.S. and Canada, it's come down to the number of approximately $255. I think the numbers are around $255 per week per employee. So if you can do the quick math, of course that's a generic rule of thumb. And there's also a lot of research that backs that up, and I would encourage you to look into that, so to get some specific numbers on that type of and size of organization. So thank you very much again. Have yourselves a great day.